Hi, today we'll be talking about consumer behavior, meaning how consumer maximize satisfaction. So when we're talking about consumer behavior, what we are saying is we are assuming that the consumer is rational, meaning they think rationally. So to explain how consumer maximize satisfaction, there's actually two theories. One is the marginal utility theory, and the other one is the indifference curve analysis. So for this video, we'll be talking about the marginal utility theory. Okay, so before we start talking about the marginal utility theory, we need to know two things. What is utility and what is marginal utility? Now, utility is just another way of saying satisfaction. Okay, because it's hard for us to actually measure satisfaction, right? So we actually create an abstract concept called the utility to enable us to measure how satisfied the consumer is. This is similar to when you are making a decision whether what to buy or what to not buy. When you are making a decision on what to buy, you most probably you'll be thinking, okay, how satisfied am I if I have this product, or how satisfied am I if I have that product, right? Next is marginal utility. So what is marginal utility? The word marginal here is very important. This you will see it throughout the economic, AS and A2 economics. Marginal actually means how much more satisfaction. I mean, in this case, marginal utility actually means how much more satisfaction that you will get when you consume one more of the good. Okay. So if it's marginal utility, then this is the definition. If it's a marginal cost, then what it means is how much more cost that you bear if you produce one more. So essentially marginal means how much more that you get if you produce or you consume one more product. Understand? Okay. So I'll show you an example to calculate marginal utility, and also to understand what is marginal utility and what is total utility. So imagine now you're very hungry, okay, and I'll give you a piece of bread. So if you're very hungry and I give you one piece of bread, you, of course, when you eat the piece of bread, you feel very satisfied, right? So let's say I'll ask you to rate your satisfaction from 1 to 100, how satisfied you are. Okay, maybe you said you are like 20% satisfied. Okay, so now I give you the second piece of bread. Because you already eaten one bread, you may not. I mean, you are still satisfied, but maybe you are not that much satisfied as before. I mean, you did not increase your satisfaction that much than before. So maybe now. If that's the case, let's say your satisfaction grows from 20 to, let's say, 35. Okay, now I give you a third piece of bread. Okay, same thing, you are still satisfied, but you may not increase your satisfaction that much than the first piece of bread or the second piece of bread. Let's say now your satisfaction grows to let me see, 44. Same goes to the next one. You increase your satisfaction less and less and less. Let's say now it's 50, and the next one is 53. And now at the very last piece of bread, the sixth bread I give you, now you may be full. So if I give you the bread I force you to eat, you may feel less satisfied than before, right? So let's say now, after you eat the last piece of bread, you actually feel like you want to vomit, and this actually decreases your satisfaction. And let's say it becomes 50, it shrinks back to 50. So how do you calculate marginal utility? Like definition, marginal utility is the increase in satisfaction that you get when you consume one more good, right? So for the first piece of for the first unit, utility actually increases by 20, because before that you have nothing. You have nothing over here. You have nothing. So the marginal utility is 20. And if you increase from 1 to 2, it's 35 minus 20, which is 15. 2 to 3, it's 44 minus 35, which is 9. Okay. 3 to 4, 6. 4 to 5, 3. 5 to 6, negative 3. So by now you should understand clearly what is marginal utility and what is utility and what is its relation to total utility. Okay? Okay. The next thing you need to know about the marginal utility theory is what we call the law of diminishing utility. What this means is, if you see the bread example as before, the marginal utility actually decreases the more you consume. It actually decreases from 20 to 15 to 9 to 6 to 3 and even to negative. So if you were to sketch it in a graph, it will look something like this. Okay, so this is the marginal utility curve. The law of diminishing utility, the definition is that as you increase your consumption, the marginal utility of a good that you derive from it actually declines. Okay, so as you increase your consumption, the marginal utility derived from the good actually decreases. This is the law of marginal utility. Okay, so if this is the marginal utility curve, another thing that you need to know, which is very important, is how do you draw the total utility curve based on this one. Okay, so if the marginal utility is positive, if you see here, for this whole portion is positive, the total utility is actually increasing. It's actually increasing, right? So for this part of the curve, although it's declining, but the total utility is actually increasing at a decreasing rate. Understand? However, at this point where the marginal utility touches the axis, this is where the curve reaches its maximum point. And after this point, where the marginal utility starts to go negative, you can see that the total utility actually decreases. So after this point, it starts to go down. Understand? Okay, so another thing that from this law, the most important thing that you need to remember is, of course, how to look at this graph. And the second thing is the definition. And lastly is, you must remember that when you increase your consumption, your marginal utility decreases. And when you increase your consumption, your marginal utility decreases. And when you decrease your consumption, your marginal utility increases. Okay? Now, back to the marginal utility theory. So according to this theory, there's actually two conditions that consumers need to satisfy in order to maximize utility. The first one is the marginal utility of one product over the price of the same product is equals to the marginal utility of over price of the other product. Okay? Before we look into details what this formula means, let's just see what does mu over p means. As you know, utility is the satisfaction, right? So mu is just what we mean by the additional satisfaction. So mu over p actually just means the additional satisfaction divided by the money that you pay. And in other words, it's just the satisfaction that you gain from spending 1 ringgit. Okay, the satisfaction that you gain from each ringgit you spend. Clear right now? Okay, so this formula just is actually means that consumer will maximize its satisfaction when the additional satisfaction that the consumer gain from spending each ringgit is equal to the other products. Why is this so? Okay, imagine now if the marginal utility over price of X is larger than the marginal utility over price of Y. Now the consumer, now what we can see here is the additional satisfaction that the consumer spends from consuming X is actually larger than the additional satisfaction that the consumer spend if it uses the $1 on Y. So in this case, the consumer can actually increase its satisfaction by consuming more of X, right? Because if, for example, RM1 spent in X will actually give you a marginal utility of 10, and RM1 spent in Y just gives you an additional utility of 8. So of course you can actually reduce the consumption of Y by 1 ringgit and spend it on X. This will give you more satisfaction, right? Okay, so that is why when the marginal utility of X divided by the price of X is equals to the marginal utility of Y over price of Y, this is when the consumer maximizes its satisfaction. Okay, now the second criteria is that consumer needs to fully utilize its income. This makes sense, right? So for example, if consumer has 13 ringgit income, it is a very logical thing that the consumer will have the most satisfaction if he finishes all of this 13 ringgit. Okay, so now we'll try exam type calculation question. So I want you to pause and try this question. Okay, so now the price of X is 2, the price of Y is 4, and the consumer income is 26. So remember, there's actually two assumptions that we need to satisfy. First is the consumer needs to fully utilize his income, and also the marginal utility over price of X is equal to the marginal utility over price of Y. So for the consumer to fully utilize his income, there are several combinations of X and Y that the consumer can choose. First is the consumer can select 1X and 6Y, or 3X and 5Y, or 5X and 4Y. Okay, so this helps us satisfy all of these combinations satisfy the first criteria, which is the consumer must fully utilize his income. Now to the second criteria, which is the marginal utility over price of each good must be the same. So let's consider for each cases. So if it's 1x, the marginal utility is 70, the price is 2, so it's 35. The marginal utility over price is 35. If 6y, it's 5 divided by 4, which is around 1.25. No, sorry, 1.2. 1.2. Okay. Now, if it's 3x, the marginal utility over price is 35 divided by 2, which is 17.5. Okay. And if it's 5y, it's 10 divided by 4, which is 2.5. Let me see, 2.5. Yes, 2.5. Okay. So for the first two cases, 1 and 2, the MU over P is not the same. So these two can be eliminated. Now let's look at the third case. 5x, 10 divided by 2 is 5, and 20 divided by 4 is 5. So for the third case, the marginal utility over price of x is equals to the marginal utility over price of y. Right? So consumer actually maximizes its satisfaction when he consumes 5x and 4y. You can actually check whether this is correct by adding up the total utility of each combination. You can check it out yourself at home. So this concludes our lesson for marginal utility theory. Thank you.